Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to members of the public and the media at the Police and Crime Panel meeting. And we do have 3 new members of the Police and Crime Panel, which will do some introduction. So, Councillor Matthew.
Good morning. My name is Sean Matthews. I'm the leader of Lincolnshire County Council for the last 3 weeks. It's been a whirlwind. A former police officer myself, down in the Met, so very different policing requirements down there. And I had a very career from being a bobby on the beat at Chelsea Police Station, which was a square mile, extraordinarily busy. So roads policing and royalty protection. So a broad spectrum of different jobs within my 26 years of the police. I got medically retired because I ruined my knees playing rugby. And they were replaced 8 years ago. That's me.
Thank you, Councillor Corey.
Thank you. I'm Lindsay Corey, former executive member for fire and rescue. So have experience of holding the chief fire officer to account and finding my way through HMI reports, which was nothing. And I am now, since the election, 3 weeks and 4 weeks and 1 day, deputy leader of the opposition at Lincolnshire County Council.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Sheard.
Good morning. I am Councillor Ingrid Sheard. I am a county councillor, district councillor, and I come in the capacity of bringing forward community views and how policing stands in and around the area, how public perception is of how we deliver services.
And of course, our new deputy mayor. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, congratulations. Okay, so I'm going to, Chief Constable, I know you haven't got a lot of time, and we as a panel, we don't want you sat here listening to our administrative business too much, because you're obviously a very busy man. So what I'm going to do is bring item 13 way up the agenda, or further up the agenda, to assist you with that, and then we don't expect you to stay. I mean, the 2 key strategic issues for this panel are funding, obviously, how many years we've had that, and performance. And they're the issues that we'll be focusing on as a panel today. So
I'm okay to that up.
Okay, well, once we've finished the debate on funding and performance, you're very welcome to leave. Don't feel that you have to stay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Cam.
I seem to have been elected at the County Council as a member of this panel, and the agenda was sent to me, but there's no nameplate out for me. And I noticed that in the papers I've actually been removed.
Well, I wasn't there, so I can't answer that question, but I'll refer to Nicola Carl.
Am I a member of this panel or not?
Councillor, may I just speak to you outside the room just for a moment after we start the meeting? Would that be okay?
No. I think the meeting is unconstitutional unless there is a proper political balance to the meeting at the start of the meeting, and that has been agreed, but it's not happening. So am I a member of this panel right now or not?
Not at this actual moment. Do you remember?
As I was elected 2 weeks ago by the county council, as one of 4 members. So why is the independent member being picked out as not the right member? There were 4. I was one of 4 elected.
Councillor Dills, I understand what you're saying. We clearly need to clarify this for your sake. So I shall call a 10-minute recess of this meeting.
I much appreciate it
to assist you. Thank you. So if you'd like to get a drink or I'll hand over to Nicola to deal with item 1 on the agenda.
Item 1 on the agenda is the election of chairman of this panel for the ensuing municipal year. May I have any nominations?
I nominate Chris Clark. Chris, Court Club, for beg your pardon, Chris Cook.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Excuse me.
Do we have a second?
Yep.
Are there any further nominations? No further nominations, so we'll take that to the vote. Please can you show in favour of the Swift's chair? That is unanimous.
If please record my vote in favour of Chris Cook.
Duly appointed as chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you to the members for your support. I will move to item 2 on the agenda, which is election for vice chairman. I know Graham Marsh is not here today, but he has been the vice chair and wishes to stand as vice chair. Are there any other members who'd like to stand as vice chair? Councillor Bailey, did you?
No, I'm going to nominate Graham Marsh as vice chair.
You want to nominate Graham Marsh as vice chair. Do I have a second? Councillor Woodland, thank you. All in favour? So that is unanimous as well. So that's Councillor Graham Marsh been voted in as vice chairman of the panel. Okay, so we'll move very quickly through apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Marsh and Councillor Burke.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest in the business this morning? No, I don't see any. So the minutes held at the meeting on the 17th of March. Are there any points of accuracy anybody like to raise? No. Okay. So are the actions completed, please?
Yes, all actions completed, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have no communications. Item 7. Are there any questions from the public, please? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so in view of our recent conversation within this panel, I'm going to move to item 9 now, which is about balanced panel objective paper. Over to you, Nikki. Thank you.
Chairman, and essentially this panel is required by law to be politically proportionate and to represent the area as a whole and to have the skills and the knowledge required to undertake the remit of the panel. Some authorities is made up of the 8 local authorities in Lincolnshire, and some of those authorities have made 3 or 4 year appointments to this panel. Others do it annually, but essentially we receive nominations into the panel, the choice of the district and county authorities, and it's then this panel's requirement to then achieve the balanced objectives as required by law. As you can see from the report, the composition that's been brought to us from the authorities that house this panel has made it so that the panel itself is no longer politically proportionate, and therefore this report puts forward some options to ensure that we can meet that objective, that balanced objective. At the options section within the report, there are 3 options that I've set out there for you. One of those options is to put 1 member onto the panel to take a significant step towards meeting the balanced political objective. And the recommendation would be that co-optee is sought from the independent group, and to maintain geographic balance, it's recommended that Lincolnshire County Council make that nomination. That nomination is received. But there are further options within the report to co-opt further members from political representatives of local authorities to the panel. Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions, please, from that? So there are 3 options. Option 1 being an independent member. Okay, so I would nominate Councillor Phil Wilkes to be the independent member. He's a previous member of the police authority. The police authority has existed. He's been a member of our panel and has vast experience of our work. So I would nominate him. Seconded by Councillor Matthew. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. It's unanimous, Councillor Dilks.
Very kind. Thank you, Chairman. I've got a lot of respect for you, and thank you, Councillor Matthews, for saying that. I do regret that we've had to go through this process. However, what you've done is as I understand it, I'm not a full member. You've co-opted me. And that isn't what the county council agreed when we nominated 4 members. Why is the independent member? Why is it the independents when, if we look at the political balance across the 8 constituent authorities, there are more independent members than any political group other than the Conservatives. You know, that's an absolute fact, and that's why we're where we are. So we weren't in political balance to start with in this, when this meeting was called. And I suspect it wasn't even, lawful, I've got to say. If you look at the representation, even with the one independent that you've now nominated as to be co-opted, and I personally I take that as an insult to be co-opted. I was elected by the county council as one of 4 members. There wasn't any division made at that stage. Say, oh yeah, but hang on, the independent. Sorry, you're only, you're a second-class member. There wasn't any of that stuff. It was we had 4 members elected, and I was one of them. So why is it the independent that's been knocked off? Okay, I appreciate your support, Chairman. I really do.
Well, I think the whole panel supports you, Councillor Dilks, and I think actually I'd like to draw a line under this debate now. I think it's a matter for the county council actually, and probably ask the leader of the county council to take that away. If a decision was made in the full council of the AGM, then it's a matter for the county council and not for the police and crime panel.
I'm not making any criticism of anybody in particular.
No, I know you're not.
But if I might say, item 3, paragraph 3.2 in the report suggests 2 co-opted members would satisfy the political objective, which is a legal requirement, and we haven't met that legal requirement. And I'm here as a co-opted member. I don't think that meets the legal requirement. Anyway,
would you like to respond?
Yes, so I can confirm that the panel was it was a legal status for us at the opening of the meeting. There's no concern about that. As nominations come in from each authority, that is for each authority to determine how those nominations come in. It is then the panel's requirement as a collective to then ensure that those balanced objectives are met. And those balanced objectives include geographical representation, as well as political representation, as well as skills and knowledge. So all of those things need to be combined and considered by the panel when co-opting members on. Co-option status is exactly the same rights as any other member. So you are a member of the panel.
with respect, item 4, paragraph 4.2 states that therefore, until the Secretary of State has approved the number and identity of the co-optees, the co-optees do not become members of the panel, but may attend and contribute at the discretion of the chairman. If appointed, a councillor co-optee will hold office for the following municipal year. I was elected for 4 years by the county council.
I believe all nominations for the county council are 1-year appointments.
Right. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Can we draw a line?
Of course, I'm fine.
No, I understand your concern, but I do think it's a matter for the county council to sort that out rather than this panel. So I would ask that Democratic Services, working with the leader, actually sort the matter out. Okay. So thank you for that. So I'm going to bring now the item 13 forward, the inspection of the Lincolnshire Police, as I described right at the beginning of the meeting. And I just wanted to just make a comment, Commissioner, that you commented on the inspection and on your website you put a statement. And within that statement it says, there are, however, areas of contention in the report which are regrettable and require additional independent evaluation, which we have commissioned. Are you saying that you disagree in some areas with the inspection?
I think, Chair, it would be remarkable if any organisation that was inspected by anybody fully agreed with the findings of an inspection report. That would not be usual. I think there are areas of disagreement in there, and we have commissioned SIPFA, who are a recognised independent body who look at finance in the public sector, to independently verify what is happening with the finances, because over not just my time of 8 years, but predating that, Lincolnshire has had a very proud record of continual confirmation by government and others that the finances have been very robust and sound and well managed. So that's slightly at odds with some of the comments in this report, which I don't believe are consistent with what we've had for a very long time. So SIPFA will be reporting imminently, I mean, any day, which will provide that independent rigour for us to present to government to be able to assure them that we are managing the finances well, and the assets well, and that there is a programme of efficient, effective management in place, which I believe to be the case.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So with a number of questions on the inspection report, Councillor Beale. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, you've Constable, welcome. Before I get to my sort of main question, will we get a copy of that report, please? SIPFA report.
I mean, I'm certainly not trying to hide it. I don't know what I'm permitted to do with that document.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the report yet, so.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we'll share as much, if not all of it. And I would err on the side of I would rather share all of it. But unless there's some particular reason why anything needs to be omitted, I'm more than happy to share it with the panel. The panel has continually been supportive in both the need to address the structural financial issue, as well as wanting to understand where the fault is. So I've no reason to not want to share that.
Thank you. Before you press ahead, Councillor Beale, Councillor Corey wanted.
Thank you for your answer, Mark. On what basis would all or bits of a commissioned report not be made public?
What I'm saying is, I do not know the full content. There could be something that's confidential that we couldn't put in the public domain for some reason, because we're talking about finances and we contract things and we do all kinds of things. There could be all kinds of contractual sensitivities or other things. My want is always to share what we can share. What I don't want to do is absolutely commit, having the minutes that I said I would share it all in its entirety and then find that there's something I can't. I would much rather be honest and say, if there is something I can't, I will say so, but we will share as much, if not all of it, as humanly possible. But if there's anything that's legally contentious, obviously it would be wrong of me to commit to it here and then find that I have over-committed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Beale, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. In acknowledging that obviously there's slight disagreement with the inspector's report, Lincolnshire Police was found to be wanting in a number of major areas, notwithstanding the action plan and commitment to address these shortcomings previously. Is this due to inadequacies of the previous action plan or lack of supervisory attention by
Sorry,
those?
can I ask you to speak up a little?
Sorry, yes. Is this due to the inadequacies of the previous action plan or lack of supervisory attention by those empowered to carry out the necessary actions?
I suppose the first question I would have, which sort of goes to the purpose of this session really, is to understand what role the panel is trying to undertake with this item. Because having read the initial piece, it sort of says that in effect you're going to act how I interpreted it. So I appreciate, Chair, this might not be the thing. It sort of read like the panel was going to almost act as the police authority and offer me recommendations to then carry out my job. So I'm conscious that that obviously isn't the dynamic that we would normally go for. So I'm trying to understand where you're coming from so I can address and give the best answers possible. So if you could explain to me, I suppose, the rationale as to what we're trying to achieve in the item, that would help.
Well, I think, yeah, certainly. And to the Chief Constable, and the Chief Constable is very welcome to speak as well, that the panel are concerned about on behalf of the community of Lincolnshire, around the outcome of the inspection report. And therefore, the panel feels that it's got a duty to ask a number of questions around the inspection report, the improvement journey, and how things are going to improve for Lincolnshire Police.
Not least wise, if I may, which goes on to the next question, which is how can one give greater confidence to this panel and the wider Lincolnshire public following the inspector's report?
I suppose before I let the chief come into the specifics, because obviously a lot of the question was more to the operational side of the house. I suppose what I would say is and this isn't unique to this report. Anybody that's had Ofsted reports, adult social care reports, any kind of reports understands this. They're very good at pointing out critical things, not so good at offering the balance. So, for example, it doesn't mention when it talks about the challenges that Lincolnshire Police face around investigation. It doesn't say they're one of the best in the country when it comes to case file quality, independently verified by the CPS, or that they're best in the country at getting rape conviction, or that they're top quartile for overall outcomes from investigations that go to court. So none of the positive ever makes it into these reports. So what I wouldn't want to do is look at this report as if everything's gone to hell in a handcart. It has not. What we have, as all forces do, and if you look at bigger forces with a lot more resource, to a different extent, a lot of the themes are replicated because the inspectorate will change tack and focus in more heavily on investigations or on call handling or whatever it decides is going to be the thing. And it's right that they do that, and it's right that it highlights improvements that are needed. And the report is a tool for me to then work with the force to then drive that improvement. At the same time, as living with the reality of what is happening within your overall resource envelope. So, for example, and we'll come to it later, and I apologise, I might be crossing over some questions, but I think it's important to set the context. Part of the process is that you have this enhanced monitoring process where you sit with partners, College of Policing, Home Office, National Police Chiefs Council, etc. Now, we wrote to them and asked for a more supportive approach from partners at a national level to say we cannot resolve the structural financial challenges of Lincolnshire Police on our own. They are being ignored, frankly, at a national level and have been for a long time. Sticking plasters of 1 year funding, etc., that we've managed to get. And that has led to some of the criticisms in the report. So when you say you're overly reliant on overtime, well, of course we are, because we can only spend on overtime rather than employ people if we've got one-off funding that arrives at the end of March that I've managed to drag out of the Home Office. So then we can spend that in that year, but we can't put a recruitment of officers in place. So some of the criticisms are born out of a lack of resources. But at the same time, we should have, had government not intervened, and I would give credit for the way the ministers and the Home Office have worked with us on this in recent months. Had they not offered us the support they have, which was akin to £5.7 million, to prevent the need to take into consultation the potential reduction of police staff by over 200, that would have happened in April. We now have the same cliff edge in October. How can you drive improvements across the board while at the same time you're planning to totally dismantle your organisation? It's like living in Alice in Wonderland. It's crazy when you're going, well, of course we want to improve, and the chief will explain how that's happening. But at the same time, you're going, well, none of that counts for anything if we have to lose 200 staff and potentially 200 police officers, because that makes you literally impossible to carry out the service at all. So this is the bizarre world we're living in, where we're here today talking about really important stuff about improvement, but at the same time, we're staring down the barrel of the dismantling of the entire police service as we know it. So that's the context. So some of this is really challenging when we're going, we need to put more people into any department. Well, they come from a different department. We don't have a machine that makes them. So if we put more people into protecting vulnerable people, we have fewer people on response. Yet at the same time, we're told to improve response times. And we're told to reduce overtime. Well, overtime is being spent putting more people on response. So those are the challenges. So whilst I'm not saying improvements are needed and are desirable, and the chief will explain how it's being achieved, and there are some really notable achievements being made there is this wider context of genuinely going, whilst in Humberside, Grimsby has 84 neighbourhood police officers to patrol Grimsby, we have 76 for 2,500 square miles. And that's before we reduce. So I think it's just an important context. So whilst I've always found this panel super supportive, and I genuinely welcome the item, both to look at the journey we're on, the improvements that are being made, the challenges we face, and the finances. And I genuinely do, because I think having this in a public forum is really important to add confidence to the public that improvements are happening. The context of reality around what happens if we do not get more money from government or the lowest funded force in the country, I'll start. Now, apologies, I've ranted a bit, but I think it's really important to understand, because otherwise what we're talking about in isolation is why aren't you ticking this box, that box, at the same time as we're staring off the end of a cliff going, what happens in 3 months when we jump?
Okay, well, thank you for your response, Commissioner. I've got two members wanting to come in. Mr. Williams first, and then Councillor Corey.
Sorry, Chairman, I just wanted off what the Commissioner said. I'm glad you highlighted that there's not enough of the good things. I went to a parish council meeting last week. I'm near Grantham, that's my ward. And they said, well, Lincolnshire police are doing good things, but where are they? What are they? And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I understand that there are challenges, but I do want to highlight that the residents out there, they do want to hear about the good things that are going on. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just picking up on your initial comment about, okay, what's the role of the panel and what's our approach in relation to the inspectorate's report. And we were having a discussion beforehand, which very much touched on that. And I think the key question for us is, if we take on the face of it, the inspectorate's report, which isn't hugely positive from a public perception point of view, and if we equate that or compare that with all of the good things that you have outlined, and frankly, a lot of the good stuff that you reflect in your own regular reports to this panel, you could forgive members of the public for having difficulty in reconciling those two things.
And us, frankly.
So there is an issue there. And when we think in terms of our role as a panel as being, if you like, a critical friend, however you might want to find that, but I think that's not it, as close as we can get to, the nature of the relationship, as it is, or hopefully should be, then I think the exam question, certainly for me, and I believe I may be speaking on behalf of some other members, is, okay, how can we perhaps develop our relationships so that we can be more effective in our role, in our supportive role, constructive, critical supportive role with you? And in saying that, I guess what I'm thinking in terms of is some of the examples you might see from panel and OPCC relationships around the country. And that is, rather than focusing on these forums that happen 4 times a year, consider whether there might be other more effective or other additionally effective collaborative mechanisms that we can pursue, so that we don't then just sit down, you present your report, we ask you questions, you respond to those questions, and then we go through the cycle again at the next meeting. Whether there is something more iterative, more evolutionary, is that the right way to put it? Iterative is probably better, in terms of the way in which we have that dialogue with you. So it isn't just this sort of, to and fro when we come to these meetings, looking at your reports. And I just, make an observation to demonstrate the point I'm making. You helpfully, I felt, included the neighbourhood policing review summary, which great, I thought that's fine. I didn't expect it. I wasn't actually aware. Perhaps
I did say previously I would bring it back to you.
Okay, that's great. And it was quite useful. But there were a couple of points in there, and I thought, oh well, break down the question, as we do. I've got a couple of questions here to ask you about it. I won't ask you the questions now, I'll just refer to them. One was about abstractions and the fact that, you know, there isn't a process in place for abstractions to be recorded, and therefore, how do you actually assess the impact that that's having and use that as an effective tool in the management of your resources? And the other one was about prevention and deterrence being a core function should be seen through the whole force as an absolute priority, and a question mark about whether there was clear enough buy-in at senior level with the force. Now, I could ask you that question, you will give me a response, but I think, you know, there might be a more constructive way we could have that dialogue and then provide you with input, if there is input to be provided from our perspective, from representatives' perspective around the table, or provide that sort of interrogation, if you like, from the external point of view that enables you to respond. And then we come up with an outcome that actually says something to the public, not just about those specific issues, but also about the dynamic in terms of our relationship and how we are providing that constructive, if you like, assessment of your role in holding the Chief Constable's account. I'll stop there. It's sort of, as is ever the case with my questions, I guess more of a discussive point rather than a direct question. But I'd be very happy to hear what your initial reaction is to the notion of us thinking about how we might develop our relationship.
I suppose what I'd say in response is there's nothing specific in there for me to sort of comment on, other than a concept that's very broad in the in that sense. So without understanding how that might look, feel, what it would deliver,
Would you welcome,
etc., etc. So
would you welcome working groups, you know, 2 or 3 of us to, you know, meet with you outside of these forums, for example, to look at specific areas? I'll give you an example of, you know, budget setting the precept before we actually go to committee and signing it off, or in assessment of your annual report, for example, or specifically in relation to inspection outcome, in relation to that. So, you know, the opportunity to actually have that discussion.
Be careful consideration, because as soon as you start doing small working groups, you're excluding political balance. And I think that's always difficult when you represent the public. And I appreciate you're not an elected member, David, so it's not anyway point of view, but I know obviously political sensitivities around making sure it's inclusive are really important. So that might be something that needs taken away by you as a panel to have a discussion outside of today, if that was a proposal that you were wanting to make, because I think it would potentially have people with a range of views on whether they would feel comfortable being excluded or included or whatever. So I make no comment on it one way or the other, other than to say I would obviously work with the panel constructively to discuss any options that they were looking at.
You'd be potentially open to that sort of discussion if it was something we could resolve amongst us.
I'm always open to a discussion, always.
Good, that's helpful, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corey.
I did notice out of the corner of my eye that the Chief Constable wanted to respond, so I'm happy.
Please go ahead, I'll.
Okay. Oh, rest that. Mark, I just want to take you back to the comment you made about the HMI not including any positives. I'm just going to ask you to reflect on that, because as someone who has the past 7 years been exposed to HMI inspections with fire and rescue, and I've also been on hot debriefs, and while the inspection regime is not identical, it is very similar and there are comparables. So I would ask you to reflect on that, because the HMI experience that I've had is that they have included positives where they have existed. So I would just like you to reflect on that.
And what you mean by reflect on it, councillor? You've got the report. It's not full of positives yet. I'm listing positives that are genuinely true. I'm prepared for them to go on in it.
Thank
We're
you.
number 1 in the country for answering 999 calls. Where does it mention that when they're talking about our performance in the control room? It is not a balanced report. It's not designed to be. I don't think they've done anything wrong. I think it's the methodology they use to do it, they follow, and I think it would be a much more helpful document to the public and to me in my job if it was, you do these things well, these things you need to pull your socks up, and actually over here you've got some challenges. That would be a much more helpful document, but that is a national debate rather than one I can.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So the remit of HMI is to promote critical analysis. I'm sure that we can agree on that and to encourage continual improvement of public services that serve the public and are paid for by the public. So I find, and I may be a bit weird on this, constructive criticism a positive opportunity.
Always.
Yes. So and please accept the offer made by Mr. Williams to have a collaborative working group in the spirit with which it was offered. And the working groups are not decision-making bodies. So I don't think anybody on the panel, I'm new to it, I don't think anyone on the panel would object to a small working group working with you collaboratively and positively, using our experience and skills as serving the public to develop ideas. They would come back to this panel, and it will be the politically balanced and geographically balanced panel that would then make any decisions on whether this is something that they'd like to do with you. So I take your point, but I will counter that working groups are not necessarily decision making.
Just for clarity, I didn't decry working panels in any way. I suggested it would be something that the panel should take away and discuss without my input, really, to come up with a proposal or something that we could discuss. I wasn't suggesting that it was a bad thing. I was saying I'm happy to discuss anything that comes forward, but at the moment there's nothing to discuss really. We need to develop that, but it's probably the wrong forum to sort of start going, how are we going to construct working groups? I think that probably needs some work before we have an out of meeting discussion about it.
Okay.
But I'm saying I'm open to a discussion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Corley, and thank you, Mr. Williams. I think Mr. Williams' point was, will you support the principle of what he was saying? And we will go away as a panel and we will discuss how we will establish some process to, and at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is support you in what we recognise as a difficult situation. Both of them. So one thing you said, that you're number one in the country for responding to 999 calls.
But we've been in the top 3 consistently since they've been measured. So it goes up and down depending on the month.
But in the report, responding to the public category, it's inadequate.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why you're number one in the country or number 3 in the country for responding to that, and yet the inspectorate have put you as inadequate for responding to the public. Constable, do come in.
Okay, morning, colleagues. Thanks for the opportunity to explain and discuss the report today. I think the starting point for me is that independent scrutiny is absolutely, very important to us. And, certainly in terms of the role of the inspectorate, hugely important to make sure that we are improving service. So, that's taken as read. I think the importance here is context and explanation. And I certainly welcome, I know there's the issue of operational independence, but clarity and explanation is so important in all of this report to give proper understanding and perception about what it really says. And I know there's pages and pages of it with lots of operational detail. Now my take on coming back to Lincolnshire, I'm relatively kind of new coming back here, is that there are areas where frankly we need to improve. There's no doubt about that. And there are areas where we need to improve, which won't cost us any more money. So again, that is balance and it gives context. So what I would say is that finances are also an important part of why we are where we are. Firstly, because, having been in Lincolnshire Police for 17 years before I went to work, it's been hand to mouth year to year. And therefore, to plan proper strategy over the long term is so difficult to do. And I have found that only in my year back here. So in terms of a long-term digital and data strategy, well, it's all about how we cut in, how we grow in, and it's so difficult to do that. Not impossible, but just effective. What I would say, and to reiterate the Commissioner's comments, that I've worked in 4 forces, and I knew that coming back to Lincolnshire would be a challenge around the finances. But even I am surprised at just how threadbare we are. That's not a badge of honour. It's not a get out of jail free card, but it's a massive, impact on what decisions we can take and how we can improve. In terms of the question of council around or what you're doing about it, well, you know, there's a whole host of activity that's going on in order to make the modernisations and improvements that are required. This is, you know, under governance that's chaired by me personally. And again, it's quite complicated to explain, but we're going through all of the things that HMIC have said in order to get a position on it. We're also looking on the other side of the coin, which is the paradox around a transformation plan that means reducing our organisation by 25%. So improvements, reductions, they don't go hand in hand particularly well together. They're not completely diametrically opposed, but you know, that is the paradox that we're dealing with. Now, I presented at the police oversight group a couple of weeks ago, and our focus is very much about saying to HMIC, this is what we've done, and this is what's changed the result. And what we're showing is impact, outcome, and, to use a cliche, green shoots of improvement, which is important. And actually, I'm really confident that all these things are fixable. There's no doubt about it operationally. What I would say is there's either a ceiling to which that improvement could go to, or if we have to cut, and that will curtail significantly the opportunity for improvement. No doubt about it. You know, you can't deliver something that's impossible to deliver on the resource kind of envelope that you've got. And just finally, if I may, Chair, just to say that you know, in terms of the report, I understand that public reading this thing, what has happened, but context and explanation again is important, which I'm happy to give. But I think also my take is that the inspectorate, very welcome, very important in our improvement kind of journey. The rules of engagement have changed slightly, so that what happens is that they spend a lot of time looking at compliance. So, for example, they'll look and say, has a supervisor assessed a particular crime and put an investigation plan on the record? And if you haven't, then that's a kind of cross in the box. Not to say it's unimportant, it isn't. But what it doesn't also consider is then the outcome. Actually, in terms of resolving crime, we do pretty well. We could do better, but we do pretty well. So I think it's just important just to say that some of it is around kind of process compliance, not always about outcome. And that certainly, I think, gives context in terms of explanation about some of the commentary that's been made. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Councillor. Good morning, Commissioner. Morning, Constable. As this is my first appearance here, I'd just like to take a second to thank all the police officers out there and all the staff who works for Lincolnshire Police. They do an amazing job. I've been there. They're probably doing it much better than I ever did. But my personal gratitude to them goes out. And to you guys as well. You've got a very difficult job. Now, it is a damning report. It is dreadful. I've got a smoky old Range Rover that pops up with all sorts of problems, and I stick a gadget into there, and it gives me just the problems to get fixed. And that's all I want. But to be honest, I'm not too bothered about the few things that are left working well in. I know they're working well. And it gives me the tools and the ability to focus in on what needs to be done. And that is all this is doing. Mark, you're right. It would be great to have a report that was a bit fairer. But the reality is that this is just telling you what you need to get sorted. And I completely understand where you're coming from when it comes to money. I've had finance meetings for the council. It's going to be awful. But at the same time, that is our job. We have to crack on and do what we can do with what we've got. So I do feel your pain, but I would just like to say that treat this more as of a positive than you have in terms of being able to work more focused on what needs to be fixed.
I suppose what I'd say, everybody, is thank you for the kind comments about the staff, and I'm sure the chief would say the same, and the officers. I think I'm not saying this isn't a useful tool. I think what it also is it is something that gives a false impression to this panel, a false impression to the media, a false impression to the public that everything in Lincolnshire Police isn't working, because it only talks about that. And that's the problem. If somebody, like the diagnostics that you talk about on your car, they give you an indication of what's working and what's not working. What it doesn't do is publish it for the world to take a view on whether you are looking after your car properly. And that is a very different thing, because we need the confidence of the public. We need the confidence of elected members. We need the confidence of everybody. We need the confidence of government. So when we're in financial discussions about the genuine challenges that we've got, we need them to trust that we're managing our money properly. And we've had that confidence for a long time, because we do. So when a report undermines that, and then we have to call in another body to clarify, that's unnecessarily problematic. So I agree with you. This report is helpful, and the chief will be able to go through more detail about where it's already been helpful in seeing improvements, because it is. And so I suppose we're seeing it as helpful. The frustration I feel is that instead of being in the public domain saying, look, this is what they're doing well, this is what they're not doing well, and this is what they're doing about it, I find myself almost having to defend, which isn't where I want to be, because that's not my job. I want to be objective, and it would be helpful if I've got an objective document to start me off. That, I suppose, and that's not a criticism of the inspectors and the report they've delivered. They are following based on what they're told to deliver, but it's because of that lack of objectivity about how you're doing in the round, it becomes very much a stick to hit you with, rather than a conversation about the performance in total of the force. And that's the bit that's very difficult to.
So I just very, very slightly push back and say, I accept what you're saying. And that is, your task is now to go out and say to everybody, not just here, and say, look, I take on board the report, but please remember that we are doing this, we are doing this.
Absolutely.
And that gives the public that balanced view and more belief in the police service that we have here in Lincolnshire and you, because you're right, they will see that and they'll say, well, how do those 999 calls get dealt with? They're not, if they're in the group, how are we doing them? And you can stand there and say, and that's why you're here in many respects, is to sing the praises of the police in counter to this. But I will just go back to this and say, treat it more of a tool and use it as you will, and have your ability to get out there and counter it where necessary.
That's exactly the approach. And what I would say is you will be key to this, councillor, because partnership working is key to all of our services in Lincolnshire, because none of us have enough money on our own to do everything. And some vital services, domestic abuse, for example, people feeling safe because the streetlights are on at night, those kind of things are key. Partnership working around things I'd like to explore with you, better use of fire buildings along with policing, those kind of things. We can work closer together than I've been able to achieve thus far, I hope, moving forward. So I hope there's an opportunity for us to do that, and that will help improve this, but hopefully it will just help all of our residents across.
I would be delighted to help you get a better service than we've got at the moment. And that's not a criticism of where we are. It's across the board for everything that I'm going to do for Lincolnshire. I want everything to be better. That's very welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you want to come back in?
Yeah, very briefly. I recognise the frustrations and your point about, not wishing to be on the back foot defensive, if you like, things, and the context is really important. I will say it's the previous report, I can't remember how many years ago, but I wasn't a member of this panel at that stage, but it did seem to me, at least publicly, presentationally, the reaction of the force, the previous chief constable and yourself, looked to me as being overtly defensive and lacked sufficient acknowledgement of the issues that had been raised by that particular report at that time. My sense this time was much more positive in terms of the constructive, realistic response to the report. Yes, demonstrating your frustrations, but at the same time explaining that there are things that are being done well and that it is unfortunate if that didn't. The previous reaction did feel to me, whatever the rights and wrongs of it, that it was almost dismissive of HMIC's competence themselves in writing it, and that wasn't a hugely.
I can't really comment on that.
No, and to be honest, it's a long time ago, and I can't really remember the details of my thinking at that time. But it does bring me back to the point that we made earlier in our discussion about how can this panel provide a more effective and constructive, or engage in a more constructive and effective relationship with yourself around these sorts of issues, so that we don't necessarily just come to these meetings and we have this to and fro between us. That the context, if you like, is thrashed out, kicked around a bit outside. We have a better, clearer picture of what's going on. And then if there are any recommendations or suggestions more likely to come from this panel, that they can be explored more thoughtfully, perhaps, is what I'm getting at. And that is an observation rather than a question or anything else, but you're very welcome to respond.
I suppose I'd say it sort of goes both ways. I mean, there was an unusual, a uniquely unusual situation where the panel spoke directly to the inspector, which I haven't got a problem with. I felt a little bit frustrated that I wasn't welcome to have somebody in the room to support that conversation, because it would have been really helpful for me to understand what the inspector was saying to the panel, what the questions back from the panel to the inspector were. So I felt a little bit kept at arm's length from that. And in the same way, that might be the frustration back. So what I would say is that's a two-way thing. If it's going to be constructive and we're going to work together on things, it can't just be, one way. It's got to be both, because I sort of felt we could have helped with some context, etc. Because coming here today, you've had one input rather than a wider discussion that then you can develop the thoughts on ahead of coming to a formal questioning session. So I suppose that's what I would say is, if we're going to work better together, I would hope that will work in both directions.
Couldn't put it better myself. I think, it feels like we're coming from.
So it's a new panel.
Yeah.
And we'll do things different.
Yeah, so great. I mean, if I may then just make if there's an action to come out of this, that maybe we, happy to sort of do something on this, can come up with some thoughts and suggestions about how we might explore this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of this,
Absolutely.
in terms of the relationship, and we can explore that outside of necessarily these meetings about what we might be able to achieve more effectively, and come back to ratify any agreement that we might have at the next meeting.
Just making a comment about your comments, Commissioner. I mean, what you could have done, you could have invited the panel or some members of the panel to be involved in the discussions around the improvement journey. I've been in discussion with my counterpart in Nottinghamshire, and they've been through a similar situation as yourself, and the panel were invited to be part of the discussions. So it's just food for thought for you, in terms of two-way communication. Okay, we've talked about finance quite a bit. I've got a couple of questions. The judicial review. Can you inform the panel where we're at with the judicial review?
Yes, part of my statement I made publicly at the time when we came to an arrangement with government over some temporary funding. I want to be clear, there is no direct link between that arrangement and what we agreed to do with the judicial review. There was no deal done to do anything, but there was constructive onward talks going about a positive way forward for Lincolnshire Police with the Home Office. And it was, because bear in mind, the judicial review was started with the previous government. It was the previous government that I took the action against. And so different ministerial team, different approaches. And I felt that the judicial review was then getting in the way of some of those positive discussions. And so I came to an arrangement with the Home Office through the legal routes that there would be a drop hands situation. So in effect, they paid their own legal costs. We didn't pick them up, and we walked away from that. So the legal process was ended, because ultimately the judicial review was taken to try and make sure that there was a forcing of the hand of the Home Office to come around the table and to actually understand the gravity of the situation, and that they were not dealing with matters, in my view, in a lawful way. I get a very different sense from this ministerial team that they are approaching it differently, and it didn't feel constructive to continue.
Thank you for that. Second point is that you've already alluded to the 5.7 million. That'll see you through till October. And then I think I'm right in saying that if you don't receive any further funding, you'll have to cut your workforce by at least 20%. All right, thinking that?
Yeah, I mean, the next few days we'll obviously get the spending review outcome. That will be pretty critical, because what we don't know is what the settlement for policing is going to be. So if the policing settlement is a reduction of 5%, for example, that they're going to passport down to forces, it could be a greater number still.
Yes.
But if all things are equal, then it will be a significant number of police staff that are at risk.
Yeah, just
Sorry, Chief Constable, you go ahead.
if I may, thank you. So, yeah, at this present time, we've done a lot of detailed work around priority-based budgeting to start to plan for significant budget cuts. Clearly, the Home Office, Minister is working very closely with us, which is really, really welcomed. And I think, part of the discussion around HMIC and the commentary around the financial management, we've shared, as you can imagine, all our budget papers and beyond with the Home Office, and they've accepted we're an outlier, and hence why we've got the stabilisation fund of 5.7 million. That was always designed to be a 6-month kind of reprieve. It allows us to work through the 6-month review. It also allows us to make the operational improvements that can be done within that timescale. And I think, to rebuild some confidence with the stakeholders that actually, we do punch above our weight and we're a decent force. There's things we need to improve upon, but actually there's some good stuff as well. But you're absolutely right that at this present time, if there is no further funding that comes forward to meet our 3-year financial plan, we need to reduce by 20 to 25% police staff and plan to reduce by 190 police officers. So the irony is, part of 5.7 million funding was predicated on the fact that we need to recruit. So we bring 80 new recruits in, but then we may need to plan for reduction. So I think that just gives probably a bit of a praising of the challenge of strategic planning in the short term. You can't have a workforce plan that lasts 5 years as you should do. So hopefully that just helps in terms of the timescales of where consultation will have to start in terms of redundancies.
I'll just come back, Councillor Trotter, on that. So thank you, Chief Constable. And I note in the papers around that subject that a decision has been made to recruit officers in September 25 and March 26. And yet, if you don't get that extra funding, what would happen?
Well, this is the paradox. The conditions of the 5.7 remain recruitment. We want to continue to recruit. I spoke at the last panel, I think, where unfortunately I had to cancel recruitment. At the last minute, which was really something we didn't want to do, but there was no option at that particular point in time. What we're now seeing from that is the vacancy factor that started to grow in the that's around about 10%. So we're already starting to see numbers coming down. We've not kept the pipeline going. So the decision has been taken at risk, but I think it's the right decision to take to bring these officers back online to make sure we continue that pipeline. But I think again, it really does portray the challenges that we face, is that we're doing that as well as planning for redundancy. So it's a difficult situation to manage, but one that I think we're doing effectively and the plans are in place. But I think just finally, back to the context of the HMIC report, what we'll see in there, they'll say Lincolnshire Police does not have a financial plan that is sustainable. Not that we've not got a financial plan, it's the fact that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because there's insufficient funding that's coming through in order to maintain it. But again, happy to take any further.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trotter, you want to?
Thank you, Chief Constable. Just want a bit of clarity about what you said. Obviously, you said you've got to reduce police numbers. But we all know that in recruiting, officers, you need the experience. I know you mentioned police staff. Are you saying that potentially it'll be police staff go, or will it be the natural loss of officers that retire, etc.? So there's obviously a problem if you're going to take on new officers and then you haven't got the officers to train them. And we all know that the staff are the backbone of the police officers. So I just wondered if you could dig into that a little bit more for me.
I think in terms of, it's a very fair point, because we've only had the discussions this morning in a meeting around the fact that, a large proportion of our police officer workforce are very young in service. When we look at supervision quality, guess what? They've not got lots of experience. It's not their fault. But therefore, some of the activities we would expect of a leader probably are not playing out just because they've not been taught or or have the experience to kind of employ the certain attributes that are required. So in terms of bringing police officers in, of course we can't make police officers redundant because they're Crown servants. So it has to be a natural wastage through retirement or leaving the organisation. So essentially, bringing 80 police officers in is the right thing. But what that potentially does, if there's no further money, then you have to make further savings in police staff, which of course wouldn't be the preference, because you want a balanced kind of skill set. The police staff make a massive contribution to us, that's part of our workforce. So at that present time, this is why it's very dynamic in terms of how we're planning, taking decisions minute by minute based upon what has come through from government. We have all the planning in the background. What I would say is, if we had to go down to 1,000 officer model and a resultant reduction in police staff as well, I don't want to be negative. I don't want to say it can't be done. Frankly, I would have concerns around the safety of how we police our county, which I would never have to say that. And like I say, this is not a question of it's all about the money, but the money is so important. And I think we've talked about this before, that if you take our most similar force groupings, the 7 forces that we have similar force grouping, I won't name who they are, but we're an outlier in terms of officers per head of population. It's not just that officers, I know police staff are important as well. If you take the median grouping, which is not platinum service for us, it'd probably be a silver service, but it would allow us to, be sustainable and deliver the service required. It's around about 1,500 officers. That is what, as chief, I think we need in order to police this county to an adequate to good level. And if we go where we're at currently, can we improve? Yes, we can. Can we improve, to good and adequate? No. If we go down to 1,000 officers and the resultant loss of police staff, I'm afraid not magicians. It's a question then of inadequate services, which is a concern.
Thank you very much. Got 3 members wanting to come in. Councillor Sheard first, please.
Thank you. My question is around, you said that we had to cancel the recruitment around this year. Are we actually considering, when we're cancelling that recruitment, what people have actually committed? I mean, it's not an easy process to actually go through the application. It's quite lengthy. I personally know 3 people who applied, were potentially given positions but not a start date, gave up their jobs, and then were told, really sorry, it's not happening. What consideration are we giving to that to ensure that we remain getting quality candidates who can have good faith that they are going to get the positions?
Yeah, and I think, again, a very fair question. I think a colleague asked this last time, and it was the last thing that I wanted to do. But at that point in time, because of the circumstances, I had no other way, because of the cost pressures it would have applied to us, and therefore, obviously linked into the kind of subsequent years ahead. I personally apologise to them, and I do know they had some personal implications, which again I feel very sorry for. What I would say, and I've just done a recruitment video only yesterday, is that on this occasion our plan is to bring in 80 police officers. I've said if you get a place, our commitment is we'll take them. It does create implications, as we've just mentioned, around if we have to reduce, then we have to do it in a different way. But I'm absolutely committed that we've taken that decision, and with government's backing and engagement that is positive, then, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic. But certainly in terms of those individuals, if they get offered a job, they will come to the organisation.
That's guaranteed.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Woodliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. One commissioner, one chief council. Regarding the estate, have you been able to slim down the estate, redundant buildings and so on? You felt one in Lincoln, have you been able to pass those into the public sector and, you know, reduce your costs thereby?
I suppose if I come in on that first, because we have this interesting arrangement that operationally the buildings are obviously run, managed and used by the force, but then they're owned by the commissioner. So if we sell stuff, then that's, the chief would say, I don't need these, and then I have to go to market with them. I suppose it's a complex picture of buildings, sort of 57 buildings across the county. I would like to work, as I mentioned, in closer partnership with Fire, who I know have a number of buildings there. And speaking to the fire chief, he's really keen to sort of work slightly differently with some of his buildings, and we can work in partnership with that, which makes sense. We would all save a bit of money and better work. Pre this government coming in, they were very clear that they were going to have an improved, different neighbourhood policing offer. So at the time, a number of buildings, I think it was 16, were identified by the force that they did not require for their operational model as it was. But the previous chief constable made a very sensible recommendation to me, which was that they were mothballed rather than sold, on the basis that an incoming government with a neighbourhood policing commitment might mean we suddenly need them again. So having given them all, you know, into community use or whatever, and get to very low capital receipts, they're not really worth lots of money, didn't make a lot of sense if we suddenly needed to then buy buildings. So it made sense to take the revenue saving by mothballing them, which we did and we banked, but we kept the buildings until we knew what was happening with the new government structure. Interestingly, the neighbourhood policing guarantee that the government has now put in place for Lincolnshire doesn't give us any additionality whatsoever. It helps pay for the PCSOs we've already got. That was part of the arrangement in the 5.7. So they are allowing us to basically use the neighbourhood policing guarantee to keep some PCSOs, which is very welcome, but it gives us no additionality whatsoever. So they're actually coming down with a big list of, but you need to do all these additional things with all your extra people, but we're working through that. But what it does mean, we've now got clarity on the fact that we don't need the buildings that operationally are there. What we're working through though is that the right list? Are there more? Is there more we can do? Is there that? So we will have a list initially, which is decommissioned. Those can go into whatever forum. Then there will be a next phase, which is about, well, actually, what's your fit for purpose estate look like? Because you're going to need to invest some money in some of those buildings. And it might be, for example, that you have two buildings that are really old. You still want a presence there, but you might get rid of the two old ones and build something purpose built that's going to last for the next 50, 60 years that serves that community. So there'll be two stages to that. So there is a new document that's been produced that is sort of going through the processes at the moment. The one that you allude to in Lincoln is under offer. That it's just buildings like that take an age to go through the sales process. It's unfortunate. What tends to happen is that they're sold subject to planning, and then that means they can be a year later and then they go, oh no, we're pulling out because the economy's changed or whatever, and you're left starting again. So things like that are very frustrating, but it is under offer. The process is going through and I get regular updates on that. So I hope that's helpful.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Could I just add just very briefly to that? I think, again, this is probably a good example of culture, because within the report, HMRC rightly said there are some efficiencies you could gain within buildings and fleet. Accepted. However, when we look at the mothball buildings that the Commissioner has talked about, revenue saving is £170,000 a year, a lot of money, of course it is. And in terms of the fleet, again, we're doing the fleet review, we're taking out 5% to begin with, and again, it's a few tens of thousands, maybe £100,000, or whatever. That's the order of the magnitude of what we're talking about. When we talk about the 3-year debt, essentially, on running the current operating model, we're talking 60 million plus. And if we have to reduce another cost pressure of 20 million plus because we're going to lose grants around uplift, neighbourhood guarantee. So I think the accuracy of the report is right. What it probably doesn't do quite so much is then balance the context in terms of, okay, well, you can save, £250,000, but you get 65 million. That's the context I think I'm talking about. And again, with most of the issues in the report, there is always a balanced context here. That's not about being anti kind of scrutinised. It's more about trying to give a balance on what the issues really are.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Councillor Matthews.
Yes, just thank you. Just to talk about buildings very slightly, I wasn't going to talk about it, but police buildings are quite unusual. What you need is cell space, really, and I'd be very concerned about reducing any of that. I've been spent the last few years in the Met trying to find a cell space at a Friday night. It's ridiculous. Was ridiculous, and I'm sure it's getting worse. So, and they're not that much demand for a fire station to have cells, although it would be somewhere for them to sleep, I guess. But the reality is that 1,000 police officers for Lincolnshire is ridiculous. Absolutely. I mean, I think 1,500 is ridiculous. I know what 1,500 police officers look like because there were events that went on in London that required far more than that. That's your entire police force. Yep. Absolutely incredible. I do have 2 questions rather than comments. Whereabouts do you do your recruitment training? And what are the numbers currently? And finally, another statement, but an old copper like me, retiring at 50 odd years old, 55 years old, is very expensive. 80 new recruits get a lot more for your buck, and they'll be keen. And it is the nature of the beast that we get young, new, fresh, different thinking police officers. So it's a great thing to see that we've got potentially 80 recruits coming on board.
So thanks for the question. So in terms of the training, we train locally. It used to be that we have regional training centres. Forces have moved away from that, and we now train locally. Actually, I think the quality of the training is quite high. And Lincolnshire has always attracted good quality recruits. I think that still plays out. I think in terms of the 80 and obviously fresh people coming into the organisation, I couldn't agree more. And I know sometimes lack of experience is portrayed as a threat, but it's also the fact that you've got new, different thinking people that will think differently to my generation and others as well. So I actively articulate that to them, that you must come in and you must challenge and ask questions and give your view. So there was another question, I think.
No, what's the number at the moment? Because you're obviously somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500.
Right. So our numbers are head count 1186, and actually we've had to reduce from strength of full-time equivalents to head count as part of the kind of savings. So therefore, the buffer to keep the uplift number, which is 1186, is now right down to the bone. What we've actually got is a reducing number based upon the fact that we didn't bring recruits in last time. And so what we're having to do is almost plan a glide path between now and the new recruits coming in and knowing where we're going to carry the vacancies. And I think, in terms of the HMIC report again, for example, management of sex offenders, you really think this is horrendous. But actually, when you look at it, part of the issue that caused the concern was because we have too many sex offenders as a proportion to officers. So you've got to have 1 in 50. That's the magic number. We were 1 in 62. Necessarily, I mean, there were some things that needed to improve, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a dangerous operation. You have to take a risk assessment based on the resources you've got. But how have we rectified that? With staffing, where have they come from? Response neighbourhoods. The kind of 999 calls that the Commissioner talks about for the best in the country, how have we done that? We resorted it through uplift and some of the kind of finances that came from that. So, like I say, I'm not saying that resources are the kind of gift for everything and the rectification for everything, it plays a massive part, as you know, compared to the Met, councillor. You know, if we said that we're kind of putting, you know, handfuls of people out in big towns, and when I say you can count on one hand, unless to cover, you know, a big area that covers hundreds of square miles, and that's not playing the violin. That's a fact. And guess what? You know, when there's a mental health episode and they have to go to hospital, or when they arrest somebody and take them to custody, then what we're doing is denuding and trying to bring them people in from different parts of the county, which is obviously a big county. So, yes, we can improve the resources that's important.
Okay, thank you.
One small comment,
Yeah,
because I think it's important because it was around the self space thing. There are 4 custody suites in Lincolnshire strategically placed. There's no plan at this stage to reduce from those. In fact, investments being put into making sure they meet current standards, etc. And Lincoln is very recently completely replaced.
Linking to the hours police officers spend. If you arrest somebody,
Yeah.
And you have to drive 40. I mean, that's the nature of the county, isn't it? But if you have to drive a very long way and then you're sitting there, much like in the NHS, waiting for a cell space, that is completely tying up the police, probably 2 police officers, who then could back out doing the work.
Yeah.
So,
And I get
very mindful about cell space.
Yeah, I mean, good news, we're very seldom full in Lincolnshire. But if you look at Louth Rural, which as a patrolling area is 250 square miles, 3 nightclubs, it has Cadwell Park, 4,000 people camping there on a busy weekend. The nearest custody suite is across the Wolds at Skegness, 26 miles. The nearest hospital is 25 miles, that's in all the time at Lincoln. The nearest mental health facility is also Lincoln. You run out of people to send to things very quickly on something like that. So, and that is what we've got now. If you're at Spalding, your nearest custody suite is Boston. If you're at Long Sutton, it's also Boston. There's already up to an hour's worth of travel to get to those. So if we had to reduce from 4 to 2, for example, you would be building in an intolerable thing. You build in inefficiency because you're saying all your CID and everybody's, you know, and the medical examiner and everybody else got so far to travel all the time that it becomes less and less efficient. And that's the problem. You sort of accept that there's efficiencies to be made, but when you get to a certain point, you are building in more inefficiency.
Thank you. I've got 4 members wanting to come in. Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Sharon. I did find a positive line about 999 calls. It is in there. It says the force answers emergency calls quickly, but then goes on to say the negatives, of course. And as Councillor Leader said, it is a dreadful report. You know, eight areas of police that were graded. Every one was requires improvement or inadequate, according to the report. And I welcome the discussion that we've had, and I think, you know, it is about moving on and how can we improve and make sure it doesn't happen again, sort of thing. But I wanted to ask my usual question. I'm pleased you mentioned the funding for PCSOs. You know, I always ask a question about PCSOs, or I tend to. The establishment was reduced to 50, I think, a couple of years ago. And we haven't recruited any, I don't think, since then. I just want to know what's the exact number of PCSOs right now, and what, you know, what is the thinking about PCSOs in the future? You know, I appreciate the difficulty we're in. You know, we're talking about cutting numbers as well as recruiting. And then finally, out of it in right now, how we manage? What is morale like at the grassroots of Lincolnshire Police right now? If I was a Bobby on the beat, you know, what's the talk and what? Because it must be very difficult, you know, with the public knowing we've had a dreadful report and so on, and talk of 190 fewer officers coming is just disastrous if you are a Bobby on the beat trying to do your best, as it were. So, you know, what's morale like and how are you managing it?
Okay, it's covered. So PCSOs, our current number is 35.
Right.
Now, I'm a massive fan of PCSOs. I think they do a wonderful job. Good. And I know we've, cut from 150 in the heyday right through to 35 now. I think the Commissioner's already mentioned around comparison with Grimsby, just PCSOs in one town versus what's in a county of our size. In terms of recruitment, part of the conditions of the neighbourhood policing guarantee is that we retain the 35 that we've got, which I'm committed to do. But obviously you have to bring cohorts in to train them, in numbers. And you then have to have the training staff to do that, which again is part of the sort of savings plan. Also we know that of course PCSOs are police staff, which we've talked about the balance between those and some of the pressures that we're facing. So when I talk about 1,500 officers that I think we need to police, to an adequate level, the highest force group would have 1,900. If we made the comparisons to the population, we would have 1,900, so almost double over number. That doesn't include PCSOs, because I think we need 150 PCSOs to police this county. And again, that wouldn't be platinum coated. It would be an adequate level that I think the public could quite rightly expect. And that would be my sort of pitch. So future very much depends on finances, Councillor, as you've mentioned, but obviously, hopefully my principle now as to what role they play and the important role they play in engagement with the public and visibility, etc. The question around morale, I think, is a very good one, because I genuinely feel for our staff, because they are, by and large, 24/7, absolutely committed to public service, and they punch above their weight. They deliver good things with what they've got. It has to be said that we've just had the Federation Morale Survey, and for example, we are top country for you feel you say you're too fair. So I think there's some benefits. That said, that survey was taken before the HMIC kind of inspection and the reports that's come from it. And I've met with the Federation only this morning, the Superintendents Association, to talk through, how people are feeling. Now we need to address that. And I think, back to my earlier comment, clarity and explanation is everything. Yeah. And I think if you understand the context, I think most people would understand that we're actually trying to take a reasonable approach to something that's very complex, very difficult. And certainly, me and the leadership team over the summer have now got a very intensive program of events. We're actually going out to speak to our people, because I talk about 3 leadership principles that are important for me: genuine support. That was genuine support, clarity of direction, high expectation. And we need to go out, we'll go out to actually discuss this with our staff, because in some respects, do we need to get to more of a performance culture where we're far more forensic about what we deliver? Yes. But on the other hand, sometimes when officers are saying to you, the crime recording process is duplicated and inefficient. So we need to listen and start to fix that. That's what we've done. We had a backlog of 12,000 crimes when the inspector were here. We now got clear. So it's an element of what we expect from them, what they expect from the organisation, and that communication and engagement, and hopefully creating, a feeling that the organisation's got my back if I work hard. That's what we need to be able to instill in our officers and staff, and certainly pulling all the stops out to make sure that we do.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you. Maybe a question for the Chief Constable and the Commissioner, but I thank the Commissioner for his very clear and detailed responses, and I get a lot of confidence from what you say. This is my first meeting, but a question, and I apologise to everyone for asking it, but we've heard, and we know from media and from what the Commissioner's been saying, that Lincolnshire Police is consistently underfunded. So your honest answer, both of you, why do you think it is that successive governments have consistently declined to give Lincolnshire the funding it needs to sufficiently fund its services?
Quite a political question. I'm happy to answer that because it's hard to change it. Tony Blair last changed the funding formula when he was Prime Minister, and like I say, it's got no reflection on the current government. So I'll say it as I find it. It was shamelessly taking money from rural to give to urban because he felt at the time that that's where the pressures were. I think that's fair.
Just that will only get us collectively so far because we've heard that comparable counties, and I'm sure they're rural, are not the outlier that Lincolnshire is. So
it's mainly county forces that are at the bottom of that structure, and there are some differences. So Cumbria is the opposite, but at the time it was a more marginal seat, shall I say. So there was a rationale given at the time for changing the formula. It has in it things like how many pubs you've got per square mile, which doesn't help a big rural county. And most of those pubs that are still the funding is based on shut years ago. We haven't got the same pubs anymore, but the formula stopped being populated with new data on population and things like that in 2013. Nobody has updated that formula, so it is completely bonkers that it is being used to give out public money.
So why are these pleas falling on, sorry, Chairman, why are these pleas consistently falling on deaf ears?
Because to change it, you will need to do one of two things. And the previous government worked on a new formula. I pushed for it. I was working for it at national level. We've got a new formula. It was academically robust. Everybody might not have liked what it might have done to them, but they agreed it was fair and robust. It went to the Home Office, signed off by ministers, went to number 10. They said, we like it, as long as there's no winners and losers. So it goes to the Treasury, who say, we like it, but clearly there's going to be winners and losers because we're not putting more money in. So it goes back to number 10 and sits on a desk. That's basically what happened. So it will take bravery from a government to take something into Parliament where some of their MPs will lose money from their own police forces unless they are putting in a lot more money to avoid winners and losers. That is, in a nutshell, why nobody wants to grapple with the problem, because to help me means taking money from somebody else. And I'm not giving you specific numbers because it won't, but broadly, the biggest loser would be the Met. Now, who politically is going to go, let's take $500 million or whatever it would be from the Met to distribute it around the country? It's not going to happen. It would need Treasury to put in a lot of money. And that's the problem. And they can't single us out and treat us separately because then they can be challenged legally by anybody else. And that's, in a nutshell, why we're having the problem.
I understand that. I will accept it to a point, not your position, but the position of government, because the Pareto principle can only be defended up to a point.
Yeah.
Right, okay, work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shear.
Thank you. Just going forward with the recruitment that we potentially have on the cards coming up, are we confident that going forward our actual training structure is correct? Do we have police officers who are specific to role? Are we multi-skilling, for example? You're saying that we need to travel far and wide across the county to meet certain needs. So is there any way we can multi-skill? Are we having the forethought to try to be more flexible, trying to be more modern, if you like, in our approach?
Yeah, and I think, in terms of the training and the quality of the training, I'm really happy that actually we do it pretty well in-house. Like the initial training, which is all around the kind of, basic skills of being a police officer. I think the question around omni competence versus specialisation. The way that national policing is going is very much about specialisation and creating silos. I don't mean that in a critical way, because often when you dedicate resources to a particular initiative, you get a good outcome. Obviously, what then does is create lots of different teams that, as you say, aren't as flexible in terms of how you can utilise their skills and capabilities. So an example of that is violence against women and girls. And quite rightly, do we need to improve? Of course we do. But even the Somerset have been the trailblazers. But the amount of staff that have been invested into that as a dedicated kind of crime and threat type is significantly. Now, we have invested. It's obviously a very different decision about how much we can invest. And I think, in terms of omnicompetence, I think our officers do have a real broad range of kind of skills of what they deal with. But I'm sorry, this comes back to finance again, just to give an example. So we've got response investigation teams. So these are people that deal with the prisoners that are brought in. So they investigate quite a lot of the crime. We also have the CID, the protecting vulnerable people areas, which are very specialised around the kind of higher threat. Now, if we have to reduce our priority-based Wilmington says that we take all our response investigation teams out. So that means that your domestic abuse, and that's often a kind of risk assessed as high, medium, low. Your medium risk starts to then sit on response officers' workloads. They work shifts, and it's very difficult to investigate during the night shift. And therefore, what we lose is that handle and specialisation of the highest risk crimes. So there is a balance between omnicompetence and specialisation. I would say we need more specialisation if we have the correct level of resourcing. We have to take a practical view. Then we end up where omnicompetence is kind of the flavour and the priority. And that has some benefits, but has some considerable risks as well around high risk issue.
If I could just add, Chair, what I would say is sitting on the board of the College of Policing, who set a lot of the standards around this landscape, it's clear that the college are leading very much on the authorised professional practice being specialisms, and they really want to see licensed to practice both in individual areas. So in effect, you have a very clear, I am competent to do this work kind of channel, and ultimately they want it for all policing. And that makes it very hard for smaller forces, because exactly like you say, if you are carrying different workloads in different areas, it's not compatible with that system of approach. So again, what I find frustrating at the national level when I'm in those meetings is they don't have to put costings to their recommendations and to what they change. Nobody comes along and says, well, if we change this in the College of Policing and we put this guidance out nationally, what is the financial implication of doing it? That's not their job to worry about. So they come up with what they think and probably is the best way of doing a thing. But then somebody else at a local level has to work out how to do it without any additional funding. And that's where you get those conflicts.
Okay, thank you. Now, Chief Constable, I'm very much aware you've got to leave shortly, I think.
I can extend a little longer till 2:15.
We'll see where we go, but I don't want to hold you back. Definitely not. Mr. Williams, you've got a question.
Good, delighted to hear that, because I wanted to get this question, and it might be slightly out of sequence before you left. But I'm just interested, a lot of the discussion up till this point has been about boots on the ground delivery of areas of policing around the county and the resource constraints that you face. I'd really be interested to hear from you something about leadership, management, capacity and capability, the pressures, and there are undoubtedly huge pressures on those areas. And also maybe as a sort of adjunct to that culture, if I just point to something I mentioned earlier, coming out of the neighbourhood policing review, which just caught my eye. But when I see a comment that says that there could be clearer buy-in at the most senior levels so that neighbourhood policing is viewed as important to the successful DNA of the force, I think, okay, what's that telling me about how the force behaves and how it sees its role, and the extent to which that leadership and management influence, if you like, is being exercised throughout the force down to the foot soldiers, if you like, and the constables on the beat. So, I mean, rather than ask you to sort of give me a blow-by-blow account against that, because I appreciate that was a light touch review as well, and so they weren't necessarily digging up at the skin of everything. But I'd welcome an observation from you in relation to leadership and management, and hopefully some reassurance as well.
Yes, certainly. I mean, in terms of the neighbourhood policing commitment, there, that's certainly not my view around the importance of neighbourhood policing right. I guess I come at leadership with you know, a very clear view that there's a quote that talks about it's not finance, it's not strategy, it's leadership that remains, it's teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage because it is so important, but it's so rare. And throughout all of my career, my focus has been on making sure that we look after our people with genuine support principle of leadership principles. And guess what? If you point them in the right direction, if you invest in them, if you have their back, if they feel as though that's the case, then I think you can have a much more productive workforce. Now, leadership development within Lincolnshire Police actually, I think, is pretty positive in comparison to where else I've been. There are dedicated systems and programs of all levels where we train our people. And that includes not just obviously the vocational stuff, that's also about the leadership principles and why management is so important. Now, at this stage, you know, having had 12 months here, what I see as the priority is upskilling our supervisors, our sergeants, and equivalents across the police staff, because they are the leaders on the ground. They are the people that set the tone. They are the people that should be setting, you know, the battle rhythm of work, etc. And, you know, if I'm honest, there's an element of, I think, inexperience which we need to help with. That's not across the board. That's in some places, of course. I think there's an element where I mentioned earlier, there's bureaucracy in process, which ties some of our supervisors to machines rather than dealing with people, which again, we're working hard to deliver against to make sure that we're reducing that level of bureaucracy and duplication. And also, yeah, the leadership principles I've spoken about, you know, they're easy words to say are hugely important. And I think an organisation works much better if it's something that's felt, not just said. So genuine support is about, you know, take these decisions, work hard. You know, if you make mistakes in good faith, we've got your back. You know, clarity of direction is, well, what do we want you to do? So what do we want you to concentrate on? And we want you to be professionally curious. We want you to be intrusive in the right way. And also the kind of high expectation thing. You know, we all sign a contract to serve the public. And actually what we want is the best out of people. Now, people have different levels of potential. Like I say, what I want you to do is make sure you're working to your potential and we will look after you and, you know, you'll have a great career with us. If you're not, that's a different question. I think, you know, anybody who we think is underperforming, again, it's not diametrically opposite that you can give genuine support but also request high expectations. So I think with leadership, again, it's something that you can say in a one-dimensional thing, on a PowerPoint slide, but actually it's how you can bring that, I know it's a cliche, into the hearts and minds of the people you look after. And that is about, I think, about tone. Do they believe you? Are you congruent with what you say? Are you consistent? And this is the kind of leadership that we're starting to sort of evolve within the organisation to make sure that is the case. I spoke about the menu of events over the summer to really start to get some traction on that. But I think just final point, you know, the question around morale, you know, that has an impact as well. And we need to give people hope, and it's our leadership responsibility to give people hope. And that's why, you know, we have to be very clear and transparent about the funding issue, but we also have to be, you know, optimistic to say, you know, there is a future and we can develop and go forward. So it's pretty nice to try, but that's what we're trying to do.
Well, it does. It sort of begs the question of how successfully you're delivering your visions and aspirations.
Well, I guess in terms of the Federation survey, you know, as I've mentioned, we are in the top 4 for all of the main measures based upon kind of cultural experience within the force. You know, some of the benchmarking doesn't come from a great place, so there's work to be done. The fact is, when you compare against the other 43 forces in the country, we're top 1, 2, 3, or 4. So I think, you know, we're doing something right. It's the more that can be done, of course. Yeah, that's what we concentrate on.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to draw a line under the debate around the inspection report, which has clearly been linked into the funding issue. And I'd like to thank you both for your openness and putting the context into the debate, which is, I'm sure, assisted the members of the panel. when Emily contacted me yesterday, Chief Constable, she said you had to go at 1 o'clock, and I said, don't worry, he will go at 1 o'clock. So, thank you for your time this morning.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now quickly move on, and bear in mind it is nearly 1 o'clock, to the delivery of the police and crime plan. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought before getting to that, I didn't, far be it for me to interrupt your chairing, but I did wonder whether it'd be a good idea to have a comfort break for a couple of minutes before we wade into that.
Yeah, I
But I
mentioned that to Nicola, actually. You took the very words out of my head. So I'm quite happy with that. So if we have a 10-minute break.
thank you.
We start the meeting. Hopefully you've had a suitable comfort break. We'll now move to item 10 on the agenda, the delivery of the police. We've a number of questions there, Commissioner, but we've already covered some of those questions. So over to you. Thank you.
No, I've nothing to add, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Williams, question, please.
I have two questions I wrote down. One about the your update, and the other one coming from the I think it was from the neighbourhood policing summary. So I'll ask them both at the same time. Comment in your Safer Together update that keeping town centres safe programme, that's moving forward. I did wonder, however, because you've identified specific towns that's aimed at. I wondered what the prospect was of that experience or that exercise being rolled out to other towns and villages across the county. And linked to Safer Together, you also talk about you basically losing the Safer Together team. And you do say in there that you will be addressing removal of the team by a change in approach to communications and engagement. I was interested to know what you meant by that. And I also wondered whether you could reflect briefly on the impact and effectiveness, the value, if you like, of, I think it's 3 members of the Safer Together team, was it, that you had? Because clearly that it was a very positive initiative when you introduced it. To remove it now, and given all the discussion we've had about the importance of neighbourhood policing and the focus that the government has on that, I'd be helpful, I think, if you could talk around actually the implications there for you and the delivery in relation to neighbourhood policing in general, and how that's going to move forward, hopefully, rather than take a hit in terms of the reductions that you're having to make.
I think, Mr. Williams, that was heavily more than 2 questions, but I will do my best.
You would expect no less.
But your first question, remind me, it feels like.
That was about the programme, keeping town centres safe.
That's right. So the programme, as always with government programmes, has very strict criteria you need to follow. So that almost self-identifies which areas are in and out of a programme of that nature. And that sort of comes on the back of them cancelling the previous initiative where we bid for funding and then obviously the Safe Streets funding. But they're particularly looking at sort of keeping town centres and city centres safe during the summer months is the thing. There will always be good learning. You would always hope that a police force will adopt good practice and good learning, and we would always seek to do that. And there will be an element of evaluation, I'm sure, looking at the results. But the challenge will be, obviously, in the context of everything we've already talked about, how achievable, rolling out new initiatives will be. So I can't commit here that it will definitely happen because it depends how many police officers there are, frankly. But
well, cite some sense of the evaluation when that's conducted. That would be quite helpful if we could have some feedback.
well, if then just bring Joey, because you're sort of leading on that, I mean.
Yes, so the Keeping Town Safe initiative, in terms of the locations are prescribed by the Home Office, they dictated certain areas that we should look at. The focus of that is around putting together plans with policing and partners on what are the activities that will be undertaken over the summer period specifically. In
trying to pull together those plans, the Commissioner wrote out to significant other partners across Lincolnshire to understand what was already taking place and what additionality would take place during that period. When we wrote out, we didn't just write out to partners covering the locations specified by the Home Office, because we were conscious that there were potentially areas within that list, or missed from that list rather, where we know there are issues. So, for example, the needs assessment undertaken by the Community Safety Partnership identified Sleaford as an area where activity was required, and that wasn't one of the areas listed. So we wrote out to County Council, all of the districts, and other partners, including those in the voluntary community sector, and said, have any activity that you think is meaningful, regardless of whether it's in or outside of these areas, please let us know, because we want it to be part of the plans. Those responses came back. The submission's going into the Home Office today. We committed to feeding back those plans to partners, when it becomes a shared plan. There'll be a communications plan running alongside. There are elements of evaluation, some of the specific projects happening within that, but there will also be an overall evaluation. So yes, we can bring it back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Trotter?
Commissioner, in regard to safer streets, please can I make a personal request that focus that driving retail crime down is also considered away from the high street, for example, retail park. M&S is situated on London Road in Brampton, and having spoken with staff, it's a regular occurrence of high value food theft, and they are powerless to prevent criminals making good their escapes into the abyss on backs and foot. I appreciate it's a Home Office driven scheme, but with diminishing high street, other parts of town would want to be considered.
Yeah, I think what I would say is retail crime does matter. I mean, both whether it's on larger, more retail park environments, and often we see car meets and things like that go to those areas, and we work with partners who own the sites usually, because they're normally privately owned sites. So, for example, the co-op owns the area up near Carlton Boulevard, and through working closely with them, there are now gates to prevent people using that site antisocially and causing issues, both for visitors to the site and businesses. So things like that go on as normal business. I think what's always going to be difficult is back to the context. If we do more of that, we do less of something else. So what tends to happen through the normal tasking routines that the operational side do, if they've got particular issues in their area at a local level, then the neighbourhood team, obviously part of their role is to prioritise what's going on based on need. What we have seen is a greater increase from Lincolnshire Police generally in tackling things like e-bikes, e-scooters, that kind of activity, which we've seen an increase not just of that activity, but also complaints and riskier behaviour, both from potential injuries for pedestrians, but also for riders and that kind of thing. And I can only see the need for that increasing. We're seeing the crossover between what looks like a normal pedal cycle, but with a motor on it, to what is in effect an electric motorbike. A few £100, you can purchase these things, and they're obviously not legal for the road or for the footpath or whatever, but that won't stop people doing it. And so there's a lot of work going on to try and get the positive messages out to parents about responsible purchasing, but also, clamping down on the removal of them from incorrect spaces, if you like. So I think it's a complex area, but it is the same thing of it's about resources and targeting it. So if in a particular area such as that, you believe as a locally elected member there's an issue, I would urge you to take that up with your local neighbourhood team. If you don't get the response you think you deserve, feel free to email it to me, and I can obviously raise it to explain to the senior leadership team that the system doesn't appear to be working. I can't intervene on an operational matter, but I can ask them to examine the system and make sure that it's working.
It worries me a bit that obviously the lack of officers, it's going to be focused on the high street. Are they realistically going to be able to do anything? Probably not.
As I say, it's always the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah,
you can only spend your hours once a day, and like I say, if that becomes the pressure, because you're hearing that's the pressure, that's why you're an important part in that system to raise that with your local neighbourhood team. And my expectation would be that they will definitely listen and respond accordingly. But it's the same thing we've heard with things like antisocial behaviour, and I've heard this a lot. is it worth reporting things? Well, clearly it is, because we prioritise based on the reports, and equally funding that we can bid for is then spent on areas where we've got evidence that there's a need. So if you get that feedback from residents or businesses, urge them to report it. And if they're not getting the service that they believe they deserve, then they can escalate it and we can take that up at a more strategic level.
Right, can I just come back to?
I apologise, David, we sort of.
No, it's okay. It happens. I'm not surprised, but yeah, the safe together and disbandment of the team. You mentioned.
Yeah, I mean,
communications.
firstly, I'd pay tribute to the members of the team. It was a team of 5 initially, 4 coordinators and then a team leader. It sort of changed purely because the team leader then left the organisation, and then another team member left. But at the time, we've obviously been going through a huge financial challenge, and I've got to be cognizant of the fact, as much as that team do really important work, and they absolutely do, you know, the budget is the budget is the budget, and ultimately we've got to make tough decisions around how that money is spent. And if it means that we have 1 neighbourhood police officer or 2 neighbourhood police officers, then I'm always weighing up what, I mean, the spend on my office is less than 1% of the budget. And actually that was the red line I set myself from the start, and we've always kept that. But nevertheless, if we employ anybody, it's somebody I can't give the money to the force to employ somebody. And that's always going to be the difficult trade-off. So it is difficult. We don't want to lose people, good people doing important work, but it's the land of hard choices that we're in. Regarding how we will continue, well, obviously we do have mechanisms to engage with the public and continue to do so. It's fair to say when the Safe Together team were initially put in, we had a different senior leadership team in the force who were less engaged, frankly, in listening to the public. I don't have that concern with the current team. So there is community engagement going on the force side that there simply wasn't at the time we introduced that team. So some of that will be picked up force side. But equally, we do have a much more effective communications methodology. So I have somebody that's leading on that work. We've got things like Linked Alert, which now the force are taking back up. The previous leadership team I alluded to basically stopped using it, and so we don't want to use it. The new leadership team are back engaged with that. So that will reach tens of thousands of our residents. We're still engaged with communicating on a cyclical basis with parish councils through the cluster meetings, which will come back out shortly. We'll be coming out to all the districts. Again, once we know what the finances are, we want to have meetings with members like I've done in the past to sort of do that. But I want to do it as a joint meeting with the force so that we can have both strategic conversation, but also talk about the specifics of policing in the locations. So there is an awful lot going on from that point of view, and it will continue to evolve. So as new technology allows us to reach people in different ways, we'll continue to exploit that. But it is evolution rather than revolution. Things change, and you need to change with them. And like I say, it would be wrong of me to sit here saying I expect the chief constable to make tough decisions on you know, how many people he's got in his organisation without me making those tough decisions at the same time.
Councillor Beale wants to come in. Thank you. This sort of should kill off my last question. Simplistic, following on from what Councillor Trotter your response, I assume if we have a local speeding issue, then we should tackle our local neighbourhood team, yes?
We also have the Road Safety Partnership, of course, which is an incredibly successful Lincolnshire partnership that is the envy of a lot of areas of the country. And so, you know, through you know, it's a whole range of things, but predominantly the key partners being the county councillors, the Highways Authority. Myself, I chair that now, and Lincolnshire Police are a key partner, but we have other partners on there looking at all of the reasons for collisions and issues on our roads. So I would always urge you to sort of go through the Road Safety Partnership. So if you've got speeding issues, for example, they can commission Archer surveys, they can also do more enforcement activity. And one of the things we're looking at the moment through the Road Safety Partnership, which would be an additional capability, it's not actually putting more people into the Road Safety Partnership, it's giving the people that are there additional capability, we're looking at providing them with additional ex-police motorbikes that are still in obviously very good condition, that they can use to access areas where you can't park the speed van because it's too dangerous to park a van on the side of the road. But as long as it's been risk assessed and it's appropriate for a motorcycle to do that, they can still do that. And that's been used in North Yorkshire to great success, because often the areas of danger don't coincide with an area, ironically, of safety for where you can park the van. The other thing it will do is enable those people to do enforcement alongside our community speed watch volunteers who are around the county, because quite often they're doing really good work identifying people that are speeding. They get warning letters, but actually backing that up with some solid enforcement is really, really important. So we're doing what we can on that side, but that's the route I would take.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Trotter, I think you've got a question on parish councils.
Yeah, you touched on it just a minute ago. You said in your report that obviously you were coming out to the parish councils, etc., and you were going to continue it. We've not actually had that input on my ward. The last time we had an online meeting was something that we instigated ourselves with the inspector. Well, I mean, it worked really well. But can I make an ask, please?
You can.
Come out. I know we're only rural, but
All
there's a lot
parish
of
councils are engaged in this. All parish councils are contacted. All parish councils are welcome. We did them in clusters, so we did 4 around the county, and we're going to keep doing them in that way. And the idea is that you will then have access to a senior police officer. Myself or somebody senior, if for whatever reason it's on a day I physically can't make it, but I will be there if not. Also, the local inspector, chief inspector. So what you will get is the local input, the strategic input, so you know what's going on across policing nationally, locally, but across the county. And then obviously I'll be there to field any questions that are from my side. And we've done a series of these, and it's all done through LAUC. So all of the parishes are contacted and informed about it. So I don't know why it's not coming through effectively.
The last round is paused. So normally it's the force who coordinate.
Yeah.
The last round was paused given all of the uncertainty around the financial position.
Yeah.
And they want some clarity. We're working with them now to get the next round of dates in, but it will come back through LAUC and just go to every parish council.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we'll make sure all parishes are engaged with that.
Do you include Boston Town Area Committee?
No, because it's not a parish council.
No, I know.
I mean, I have no problem with them attending. It's just it's because it's done through LAUC, who obviously coordinate the parishes. They won't have necessarily included them, but that's partly because as well we will do a separate briefing for districts to make sure that those like we did before, where we come along and we can have a session where we can behind closed doors have a very open dialogue to inform and take questions. So that will happen again, and I think that picks up the members of your town committee, does it not?
Could be.
If it doesn't, then we can obviously look at making sure they're involved.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trotter, I think you've got one at the bottom.
Sorry, last one, I promise you. It was to do with the recommendations off the back of the field report. I note that quality assurance thematic testing blessings on the QATT has been introduced for life investigation to improve investigation quality by officers. Are you able to comment, Commissioner, if the training is facilitated at an early level in officers' initial training probation?
Well, it is a new process, so obviously it hasn't been involved previously in their training because it didn't exist in the structure at the last time we recruited. We did the PRM meeting, which is the meeting where we go through all of the performance data of the force yesterday. So that was the first time we were dealing with some of the data in the quad element of the report, as it's being called. It's all the training has been done across the force regarding how that works. The supervisors are aware of their role within that. You know, obviously the detail I'm getting is at a more strategic level rather than that local level. But the force assures me that there is reporting processes all the way through the organisation to ensure that that is being used. I think it's one of those things that's always challenging to implement because it's a new thing and people can feel, you know, is it just, yeah, it's just a new thing where people are sort of getting at me for not doing it. And it's been a bit of a journey so far to sort of get them on board with it in a positive way and understand actually this is, it's sometimes about, it is about false performance, which is very much necessary, but it's also about then listening to people as they have reasonable questions of the force. So as this is being rolled out by the performance team around the county, there is also a senior leadership member, assistant chief constable upwards, going around the county along with that, just literally behind, because that's what the performance team would rather, that they can go in and do it themselves. But the idea is that they are then fielding, listening and learning about what's going on the ground, what their concerns are. And some of the processes where officers and chiefs are saying, well, actually, there's duplication here, we can do this better, it would free up my time. Because we don't want sergeants spending their entire shift doing paperwork. And then we're saying, but you're not performance managing people. Well, no, because I'm still doing all of this. So we've got to find ways of releasing them from that other stuff. So the chief's on that. It's fair to say it'll probably be a bit of a journey until it stops being clunky, but it's already rolled out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That completes the questions, Commissioner, on your plan. And to item 11, your annual report.
Again, happy to take any questions on it.
Are there any questions for the Commissioner on the report? No, there's no question, Commissioner. So thank you for your annual report. I think at this point, Commissioner, you're a busy man, obviously.
You done?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Very kind.
Thank you very much for your attendance today, and please pass on our thanks. I know we thanked him whilst he was here, but please pass on our thanks to your Chief Constable.
No, we'll start getting used to it, Chair. I can't possibly do that. I don't live to get comfortable.
No. Okay.
Please solve Brian, then we'll get there.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move to our report. Mr. Williams, over to you.
Well, I don't have a huge amount to say on it, other than hopefully the expectation that everybody has had a chance to read through it. I think, and for the benefit of new members, when we first moved to here, I did say at the time that the first report, I think, would necessarily be reasonably broad brush high level. It would just be a turn of the walking in terms of what an annual report from the Police and Crime Panel include and what it would look like. And that there was hope, ambition, aspiration. Given our discussion earlier on this afternoon, particularly with the commissioners, I think pretty positive reaction to the proposal of looking at ways that we might work more closely together. That future annual reports would enable us to provide something a little bit more focused, maybe a little bit more specific in terms of achievements or outcomes, because I do recognise that this report is less demonstrative in terms of what have we actually done during the course of the last year, what's the panel actually achieved through its activities. So I say that as an acknowledgement from my point of view that it could be stronger, but I didn't think it could or should be stronger, given that it's our first stab at it. And that, I think we needed to find a way of engaging more directly with the Commission, as we've already discussed this afternoon. So I'll stop there. And we did talk earlier, I think, just about including the details, as in panel members' names and location rather than political affiliation.
Yeah, we did.
So that would be easy to insert. So really, I would just invite observations, comments, recommendations, and hopefully agreement that we can go ahead and get Emily to produce it in a nice glossy format, and it can be distributed worldwide and with appropriate copyrights put on it.
Any comments, observations?
Deal, film deal.
Why not?
Netflix. Okay, so I think
Just ask, Chairman, if I may, thank you. How did it be laid out? Anything about the design of it? It's going to go through a process of being, thank you, Emily, yeah.
Yeah, we'll look into the format and
Yeah,
making it look a bit more appealing.
yeah. Put some pictures in or something, and,
well,
I don't know, okay, maybe not, but,
I think from a cost point of view, we've got to be careful.
Yes, indeed.
5,000 copies that are
okay,
massive cost. I think it's just to thank you, David, for the hard work that you've done on it. But I think putting it on our website for circulation is the best way forward in today's modern world of tech, where people access things.
If I may just pick up on that, and the issue of the notion of a website, and we don't have a dedicated website. Other panels do have a website, Avon and Somerset, as an example. You want to go and have a look at it there. I wouldn't suggest that we construct one now, because I don't think, frankly, we've got a lot to put on it. But I think maybe that could be an ambition further downstream as we develop this relationship, that hopefully we have more evidence, if you like, to provide in terms of our activities in collaboration with the Commissioner. And I would like to offer that, if you like, as something for the future to consider. But in the short term, certainly, it could be put on the council's website and our bit of there. I don't know what other distribution mechanisms we might consider. Emily, I don't know if you've given that any thought. I sort of have, but I haven't got any suggestions really.
Yeah, I think we could definitely send it out to all districts who can distribute it to members, and yeah, we'll have a conversation about further social media we can.
Yeah,
do
I think my sense on that one is we don't want to be too prolific in how far and wide it's distributed, because I think we need to manage expectations, and the report as it stands, I think, is a start. And as we have more to say and more to demonstrate, then I think it would be perhaps helpful and appropriate for us to see how we can get further outreach. And of course, it gives us more credibility and validity, if you like, I think, as we start to publish our own activity. What's the point of a police and crime plan? It's really what we're about demonstrating, I think, through the report.
I think my main point, if I may, Chair, I think, excuse me, Lindsay, but I think the main point was about the layout, was, to use columns rather than right across an A4 sheet, which is very difficult to read. It's much easier to read. That's why newspapers have columns, to make it easy to read. And that's all I was kind of looking for, just ease of reading.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Beale first.
Thank you. Mine only very quick. Obviously, we need to ensure that being inclusive, that we make provision for those where English is not first language, or indeed abroad is really impaired people as well.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a good point. Councillor Corrie.
I think that could be accommodated on the county council website. The capability is there already. Also, do we know where the Police and Crime Commission's report is distributed? I'm sure it goes to partner organisations and libraries. So if we need a very cost-effective print run, then maybe this could be a partner document to that. We said, and also, downloadable as a PDF from council website. I'm sure that was.
Thank you.
And also photographs, we wouldn't have the copyright for the photographs.
Okay,
Notes. So, need to be, as you know,
I'll take the point.
yeah.
Okay, so we need approval. The annual report, proposer for approved. Councillor Matthew, seconded. Councillor Corey, thank you. All in favour? Yeah. Unanimous. Thank you. Once again, Mr. Williams, thank you for your hard work on that. It's important. Because the panel do have an annual report demonstrating, quite rightly, the work that we do. Okay, so we'll move forward to item 14. My intention is to finish this meeting either at no later than 2 o'clock. So complaint statement, Mr. Birch, thank you.
Thank you very much.
just to reassure you members of the panel why I've stayed here and everyone's gone, like thinking, oh, you've got anything to do. The legislative framework means that in relation to complaints about Police and Crime Commissioner, I play a part that you delegate to me. So I work on behalf of you as the monitoring officer in assessing those first complaints that come through, deciding whether to record them, which is why you've got me here today, telling you there have been 2 complaints in the period recently. We don't tend to discuss the detail of complaints at these meetings, that's not appropriate, but we share all the details of the ones we record and the ones we don't record with your officers. So you have full oversight, if you like, and insight on those complaints. But I do that work on your behalf, so I work for you. Reports here, it's succinct as ever. There are 2 complaints in the complaint period.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Nicola, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So just reporting on behalf of Will Bell, who is the Host Authority Monitoring Officer. And when complaints are recorded, they are then passed to the Host Authority Monitoring Officer to undertake to progress these further through the informal resolution process as per our arrangements. So those recorded complaints have come to the Host Authority Monitoring Officer, and they are now going through that process. That process hasn't concluded, and on its conclusion, panel members will receive an update on the monitoring officer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Birch. Thank you for your time. Moving on to item 15, I've already alluded to this. Councillor Burke's not here today. He is our representative on this national panel. But he has sent me a report, an annual report from this panel, and I'll have it circulated to you as members within the next 24 hours. So moving on to item 16, the work programme. Emily, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. No changes to the work programme. Just to note that we do plan to undertake the recruitment of our additional 2 independent members, which we'd agreed at previous meetings. We have Councillor Beale and David Williams on the working group for that at the moment, but it might be suggested that we can add an additional member. Agree that today.
Does any member would like to join that working group around?
I think
Co-opted independent members?
It'll be a short list and then interviews. Shortlisting and interview, that's what's going to be involved.
Yeah. Not of our members to get on your task group.
Oh, really?
I suppose the logistical side really is obviously where we do the advertising, etc., to attract suitable candidates.
Our support officers will do that, and I'm sure county HR will advise around that because they'll be doing it all the time. Quite rightly said.
Just on that, Chair, I'm happy to join panel if they need an extra body. My only caveat to that would be I do know somebody who is interested in applying for that position, so it may create a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
So on that point, similarly, I know somebody, but my view is that they had to still go through the selection process, etc. So, I personally don't have any qualms about being on it.
We declared it last time because I think Graham knew one of the candidates
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah. Just declare it.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Passel. That's kind of it. Okay. So nothing else on the work programme?
Thank you.
Okay. So the date of the next meeting is Friday, 19th of September. Thank you very much for your attendance and your inputs today. It's been a really useful conversation we've had today with the Commissioner and the Chief Constable around what I described at the beginning of the meeting, 2 key strategic